Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got some big updates in regards to the US China trade negotiation. It's a whopper, it's a big one. And we've got Donald Trump, just like he did last Friday, now pressuring China, potentially not liking where the negotiations are headed. So Trump comes out in a public statement on Truth Social. Again, just like he did with the EU last week, there was an agreement. They said they're negotiating with us now, and we've delayed it to July 9th because originally Trump said about the EU, well, we will just tariff them at 50% starting June 1st. And so now that's been delayed because he gets his people tell him, listen, they don't want to negotiate with us. They're not giving us a good deal. You need to come out and say something. You needed to get them to nudge. That's what tariffs are in terms of how Trump is using them now in the negotiation sense, to where you get these countries to nudge, you put pressure on them, and you can get better deals through the pressure. If you don't put any tariffs on these countries, the VATs are going to stay the same. All of the trade barriers are going to remain, and the crazy deficits are going to as well. And we're still going to have deficits with many of these countries because we're bigger than them and we have a much higher GDP, but we want to limit it to a degree to make it to where we're more competitive in terms of a fair global trade. And so now Trump says that China has violated the deal that they made with the United States a short time ago. Remember, a few weeks ago, it was announced on a Sunday that there was the deal, just like we had with the Liberation Day deal after that, to where it was a 90-day period. The tariffs on China went down from 145 to 30%. China's tariffs on us, the retaliatory tariffs, went from 130% to 10%. And so that was the original deal. Now Trump says they violated it. There's some actions happening behind the scenes with the Chinese Trump is not too happy about, whether it's their negotiation, whether it's them potentially negotiating with other countries. We don't know, but you can see Trump talks about how we had a deal 2 weeks ago with China. It saved their economy. When it comes to the Chinese economy, nobody really knows. They blatantly lie about all their metrics. So whenever anyone sources Chinese economic numbers, it's quite frankly ridiculous because of how much they lie about. I mean, they lie about everything in terms of even their GDP, their population, they lie about that, and they lie about their unemployment rates as well. So whether we think their economy is failing, it's not failing. We do know for sure they went through a deflation period because of their zero COVID measures that happened in 2022. So they've been struggling. How, to the extent we're not exactly sure because the metrics are not 100% lining up, but you can see Trump said he made a fast deal with China in order to save them from what he thought was going to be a very bad situation. So he's framing this like the Chinese economy was failing, and that, oh, we're doing this because we're throwing them a bone. And so you can understand the framing by Trump. I do think it was more of a, China is not going to give into something like this. If we do want to renegotiate, I think the United States and China, by and large, want the same thing. China wants to be less reliant on the United States. That's easier said than done because of our consumer base. It can't be produced in another country, just in terms of how many wealthy people we have that are willing to buy. But they do say, and they've weaned off of us in the past, to be fair to the Chinese. You take a look at the last decade in terms of their reliance on us relative to other countries when it comes to trade, it has decreased by about 6 or 7%, but they want it lower, and the United States certainly wants it lower. That's the whole point in terms of the crazy deficit we have, limiting that deficit and maybe forcing China to trade with other countries. So Trump says that they wanted to do a fast deal to save China in their horrible situation. And I agree. I think China does have a very tough economic situation. They've got crazy youth unemployment rates. They stopped reporting on those. And they also do have, they caused it themselves with their zero COVID. They originally lied about all the numbers back in 2020, but apparently nobody cares about that. Remember when it first kicked off, it originated out of China, and they said, oh, by mid-March or late March, we have 0 cases. Yeah, okay. And then you can see because of this deal, everything quickly stabilized and China got back to business as usual. Everyone is happy. This is the good news. The bad news is that China, perhaps not surprisingly to some, has totally violated its agreement with us. So much for being Mr. Nice Guy. So Trump is saying China has violated in some way the temporary pause that we had agreed to with them. And this comes off of Scott Bessent doing a interview with Brett Baer and Fox, and you can see this is what he says. He says, this is him talking about the Trump cannot put all these tariffs on. Remember, I said this yesterday. It just makes no sense. The timeline is ridiculous, and this is absolutely correct. It's inappropriate for the judiciary to weigh in here when the Senate had the opportunity to override and did it. Exactly, the Senate would override right after it goes into place. The timeline doesn't work, especially now considering we're negotiating very likely better trade deals, and we already negotiated one with the UK. So why would they, in terms of the timeline, this is something that should have happened right after the original Liberation Day tariffs were put into place. You can't do it a month and a half later. This is, especially now that we're negotiating better deals. It makes no sense. So absolutely, it's a timeline issue, and it's also, the Senate could have came in, Congress. This is all legal. Trump, the president, and the executive branch has the authority to set tariffs. You can say, well, it's an emergency and set them. I mean, because it is. I mean, take a look at the deficit. Take a look at our trade with China and, I mean, the EU. We're getting crushed there. They threw a hissy fit. They didn't even want to negotiate with us after we told them take off your VATs. They don't want to do it. And that's why Trump had to say, well, the EU is not doing anything. We're going to tariff them 50% on June 1st. And they said, all right, we'll come to the table. We'll come to the table. Don't worry. So there's not, it seems like China is really not cooperating here. Look at this. The talks with China have stalled. And he says, well, it's very complicated. We understand. And he seemed a little bit more optimistic than this, just saying it's stalled, to be fair. But there's something behind the scenes happening here. Just like the same thing with the EU, to where you want to nudge them along a little bit, so you put out a public statement. That's what I would say about this. Now, maybe it's more serious, and the framing of it by Trump, they asked Trump about, you don't want to say it's going to be, this is in relation to it, because I don't think it is, but people kind of joking about, that question about Trump chickening out with the tariffs. That's just not appropriate, especially now that we've got these potential trade deals. And Trump might say, well, you know what, I'm going to put tariffs back on. It's like, what kind of a question is that? It's just a horrible question. But look, when it comes to this, I do think that the point is we want to get all these. You look at China versus the other countries. The other countries are on a more accelerated timeline because their 90-day window, if you think about it, if we reached that 90-day window, if Liberation Day happens on April 1st, or it was April 2nd, and then 10 days later or 9 days later, whenever it was, we agree to the 90-day window, you're talking about April 11th, May 11th, June 11th, July 11th. So that's the exact same thing the EU has. So it's around July 10th, July 11th, give or take a few days. That's the 90-day window. So we're coming up, honestly, like a month and a half left of these negotiations with these countries. Now, Trump very easily could extend the window, but the thought process is that you do want to have a timeline to force these countries to be motivated to foster in better trade deals with the United States. That's why you put a window on it. So you force negotiations to happen within a certain time period. And the thought process is, well, let's get all these other negotiations done. Let's get a huge trade deal with, there's some talks about India. If you guys don't know, with Apple, originally Apple said, well, we're shifting from China to India. And Trump said, I don't like that. I want them in America. And it is a little bit of a problem in terms of a price increase when you talk about shifting that much production into the United States, at least for a short period of time. I don't think the iPhones are going to cost like $3,500. That's fear mongering. If the experts say, well, it's about $100 price increase on the iPhones if they're made in America, about $100 to $200. If Apple is really obsessed with their margins, yes, it would be more, but they're still going to make money off of it. You look at the manual labor for iPhones, it's not nearly as extensive as people think. There's specialists that come in and they do a lot of it, and they say, well, now robotics are going to do a lot of it. And that's what Tim Cook said. He said, well, we're going to produce most of them in the United States, if not all iPhones in the United States. When we get robotics, then the robots are able to do a lot of the smaller labor work and the smaller screws and that type of stuff when you actually put the phone together. So, and Trump's like, no, we don't want that. We want we want U.S. jobs making these iPhones. And certainly it's an admirable thing to say, but it does create a little bit of a price increase just because of China. They've just got a ridiculous labor force. This is what they do. You could go to China tomorrow and say, I need 1 million people, and they'll have them for you. And they'll all work for extremely cheap. So we're not really competing on an even playing field. That's the point of some of these tariffs. Now, I do think the tariffs have evolved into a negotiation asset, and people are like, well, which one is it? Are tariffs good or are they negotiation? Well, it's both. Tariffs are both good and they're for negotiation. But listen, we knew we were going to get crushed on this when it came to the micro picture, because for tariffs to work, it takes time. And what Trump did is he went really aggressive. And listen, we can defend that because he did force negotiations, and the tariffs were immediately brought back down. Now, you can understand why Trump wants to renegotiate with all of these countries, because he wants to cut off China's avenue to ship and import their product into other countries, and then the other countries trade with the United States. So by proxy, they're getting around the tariff. We can renegotiate with everyone. I mean, Trump tariffed every import into the United States at least at a 10% rate when he put those Liberation Day tariffs on. You have to understand, we're going to be renegotiating with these countries. When we renegotiate, there's going to be clauses in those negotiations and in those agreements that say any items you get from China, they're going to face a much stiffer tariff. That's the exact same thing that happened with Mexico. We put on, it was like a flat rate 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico for products that were not part of the North American trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And those are products that would be shipped in from China. If the product comes in from China to Mexico and Mexico trades with us, that's going to face a tariff. We're not exempting that. But Mexican-made products would be exempt under that trade deal that we already have, because we have an extensive trade agreement. It's different than all these other countries. When you're talking about landlocked with Canada and Mexico, it's a lot easier to trade with them. The problem is when they get things imported from China, and then that's a way they can get around the tariffs. And so we're trying to really hone that in and not allow it to happen. And so, look, these talks with China, they've had a little bit of a speed bump. But if you listen to what Besant said, he said, look, this is going to happen. It's very extensive. It's hard to get these things done. This is a huge trade deal we're trying to do. And look, I had heard the floor was 30%. What that means is these are going to be grueling negotiations with the Chinese, because if the floor is 30%, that's what it is right now. That's our tariff on them, our baseline tariff. So it's either going to stay at 30% or it's going to go higher. So the Chinese negotiating with us, they certainly will negotiate a deal in which they can swing as a victory for them to a degree. That's just the reality. They're not going to give in. I think Trump realized that when he made that deal. He said, well, 145 versus 130, their economy is already in a horrible spot. They're getting crushed by these tariffs. I mean, we're certainly to a degree going to get hit if we have a 145% tariff on them and they have 130 on us. But in terms of the deficit, we run such a crazy deficit with them. They run a surplus with us, meaning if we're in a trade war, they're going to be hit a lot harder because they're more reliant on us to buy their products than we are of them. We trade with more global partners, but it's more so just domestic buying and selling in the United States based on our economy and our just overall consumer base that's much better than and bigger and more rich than the Chinese. That makes it to where we have flexibility in terms of trade. We don't have over reliance on China. China has over reliance on us, and they've admitted it. Why do you think they're trying to change it? They have changed it the past few years, but when we come to a deal with them, we're still going to be doing trade with China for sure, 100%. But it's going to be a lot more tamed in terms of the rules in which the trade can be done. And the deficit is going to be cut. It's not going to be eliminated. It can't be. I mean, they've got a bigger population than us. We're probably going to run a deficit. You can say because of GDP, we shouldn't have a deficit with them, but it's more so, when they've got a bigger population, they've got a much bigger labor force, so they're going to be able to manufacture more things. But look, when it comes to these talks, we'll have to see. This is what Trump does. He puts out these public statements. Normally they happen on Friday or Thursday, and they say, look, it's not going well. They're being really bad during these negotiations. You may have to put out a public statement to try and posture against these people because we don't like where these negotiations are currently at. Now, does this mean, it kind of reads like Trump is going to reinstate the 145% tariff. I don't think that's what this is. This is more so a threat, but it does read like they violated the agreement, so the tariff is going back on. But again, I think it's more of a threat to get them to negotiate fairly, just like he did with the EU. And so let's get these deals with these other countries. We can force China into a corner We're still waiting. I mean, they had said last week, to be fair, on Sunday, last Sunday, they said within the next 2 weeks, we're going to get huge trade deals. So, and we, they've done this multiple times where the administration will say, well, the big trade deals are coming. And then we wait. Yeah, we get the UK deal, which some people say is not the best. No, the UK deal was good. We still kept around a 10% tariff on them on certain things. It was a balanced deal. It was a fair deal, but it was a good deal for the United States. The thing is with Trump and the idea of raising revenue off of these tariffs, I totally get it. I do understand it. And I think it would be possible, but it would be possible in a way to where you almost layered the tariffs, meaning you hit like I would do the tariffs in waves, and it would have to almost be a yearly thing to where just because we have to have time to domestically react to it. If you tariff everyone the exact same, it's just going to cause a bottleneck and the prices are going to increase quickly. And I think Trump realized that, but also it was more so, again, there's a number of factors. It was the yield. I mean, the yield spiking with the stock market going way down, not way down, but it did suffer a setback. And it was also just, we want to get these countries to renegotiate with us so we want to cover up any loophole to where the Chinese can use with other countries in terms of sending their goods to the countries and the countries trading with us to get around the tariffs. So we want to close up that loophole as well. You could argue, well, we could have done that without starting this massive trade war, but it's not even a trade war at this point. If you're talking about 10% tariffs on these countries, it's extremely tame. And it's not really causing any price increase. 30% tariffs on China. We had tariffs on China. And I'm not going to be disingenuous. I do understand some conservatives do say that, well, Biden kept tariffs on China. I mean, this is something completely different, what Trump is doing. He's being extremely aggressive, and I like it. I mean, but I'm not going to say it's the same thing. It's not. What Trump has done is he's a lot more aggressive in terms of the way that he's implemented the tariffs originally. Now, not so much, because now it's down to 10% and 30%. And we still have the auto tariffs on, which I think are going to be a really good thing. I think a lot of people support those when you're talking about car manufacturing in the United States. That's something we can certainly do and really not drive up crazy high prices on vehicles. That's something that can be accomplished, it can be implemented, and it's going to bring a lot of jobs back to the United States. And it's something that has significant support from a lot of liberals in the Rust Belt as well when you're talking about those auto tariffs. And they say those auto tariffs could generate around $100 billion in revenue. And people were originally saying, well, could we generate 600, 700, 800 billion? I mean, hypothetically, if you kept every tariff on that Trump originally had on, I think it probably would have been 7 or 800 billion per year in revenue. But you're dealing with many other issues if you keep all those tariffs on for a prolonged period, the most obvious being higher prices. But I mean, the thing is with tariffs, with economics, it's always a reaction. So you do something that's relatively good, it's going to cause an opposite negative reaction in a way. With tariffs, it's something that has to be stomached. It's more of a macro. You have to wait for the tariffs to really create prosperity within the United States through domestic production. So we live in a world to where it's like every 3 days we have to get updates and validation. Well, that's not really how a tariff works. It's a prolonged period in which we slowly but surely bring manufacturing and production back to the United States, which can be implemented through different tariff strategies. Trump decided to do a hardline tariff on everyone, and now he's using the tariffs as negotiation. But I mean, I think it's important to understand, just like the deal with the UK, we will be keeping tariffs on countries when we reach trade deals with them. That's just the reality. Now the tariffs are going to be tame, but they're still going to be on certain sectors and countries. We're going to be taking in, I still think we're going to be taking in 300 billion per year in tariff revenue. That's really the number I'm looking at. It's around 250 to 350 billion. Now Trump could go crazy and say, no, we're redoing it, we're reinstating it, and then maybe we make a lot more. But again, you're talking about higher tariffs going on. It's going to have some effects. But I think even when we come to these agreements, like with a South Korea or an India or the EU, Japan, when we start coming, Taiwan's another one, when we start coming to these agreements, we are going to keep some type of tariff on the countries, and it's going to generate revenue. Listen, 250, 300 billion dollars, that's nice revenue. It's not going to, we really do have a deficit of $1 trillion because another trillion is based off of interest. It's a $1 trillion deficit. Yes, it's 2 trillion. Basically, that's because of interest. So it's 1 trillion. So you can cut, if you generate 250 to 300 billion dollars off of just tariffs alone, you're cutting 30% into that right there. Again, technically it's 2 trillion, but if we're servicing the, right now with the interest rates, and we're trying to get the interest rates down, we've got the inflation down. I just checked Trueflation. Trueflation is sitting around 2%. It's stagnated the past week. So it's not like Trueflation is really ballooning. And that's, the Trueflation going back up from like 1.3 to 2%. That's mainly based off of the recovery we've seen in terms of the economy. So it's gone back up a little bit. It's also the crude oil prices. There was some geopolitical stuff on Israel striking Iran, and it spiked the crude oil price. But I don't think that's going to happen because Trump has said, he told Netanyahu to F off, and he's just done with it. And we're just sick of it. We're just sick of the Middle Eastern stuff. And that's why Trump's trying to come to an agreement, probably at the G7 between Israel and Palestine. There's going to have to be some agreement there. There's going to have to be some agreement with Iran. We have no choice. We are done with these situations. But talking about this, this is what Trump does. There's some type of negotiation not going very well with China. They don't want to cooperate. We're going to put out a public statement to try and move this along. Now, with China, it's a little bit different in terms of intimidation. They don't really care, honestly. But look, the point is, whether China cares or not and the public posturing that they want to have, the reality is they're extremely reliant on us. This trade deal is very important for them. It's more important for them than it is for us, 100%. You just hear more about the U.S. perspective because really all their citizens are powerless in terms of their political system. We've got a lot more power here, so we'll complain about every little thing, just like a tariff that causes certain prices to go up. We'll cry about it. But in China, you're really not allowed to do that. You can't do that. And China plays the victim. They say, well, you know what? Sure, we've been taking advantage of our supposed free trade, which really isn't free at all. It's non-competitive because of their labor laws. They say, well, we have this great free trade and the United States is big bad evil. How dare they tariff us over nothing? Well, it's not over nothing. It's not over nothing. But they can say we play the victim because they're the ones that tariffed us. We just reciprocally responded. So, it's unfortunate. But either way, guys, we'll see what comes of this. Make sure you like the video down below. Also follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.